Welcome to Psychology 150, Chapter 12. We'll be doing Part 1 here today as we had finished the last section last Tuesday and then had a test on Thursday. So, social psychology is the study of the interactions among more than one individual. All of us live in interdependent groups. We all depend on other people for certain things. No matter how independent and self-sufficient you think you are, there are other people who say, protect your country from invasion, or make sure that the air is clean enough to breathe. Because we interact with numerous people every day, it's useful to be able to make judgments about them very rapidly. Not doing so would cause us to have real difficulty interacting, since we wouldn't know whether that person was friendly or threatening or helpful or kind. And we do this very rapidly through what are called thin slices of behavior. It doesn't take more than a second or so for us to make some pretty significant judgments about other people, right or wrong, and sometimes we are wrong. For example, if you look at a 30-second film clip of your instructor before the semester starts, people are able to make better than average decisions about what kind of rating they're going to give the class at the end of the semester. One of the things that we do is we make judgments based on people's facial expressions. The first thing we typically notice about people is their face, and this tells us things like what emotional state they're in. Are they paying attention to us? Can we trust them? Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they sad? And much of this information comes about through eye contact. In the dominant American culture, this eye contact is really important. We're taught to look people in the eye. Look me in the eye when you say that. But this is not the case in all cultures or in all parts of the world. One of the more important aspects of social psychology is something called attribution theory. Attributions are the explanations we have for what happens in the world, including our behavior, other people's behavior, and the natural forces in the world. And there are two general classes of attribution that we make about our and other people's behavior. Personal attributions, or sometimes called dispositional attributions, are explanations that describe people's behavior as due to something about them, something internal, their abilities, their traits, their moods, their efforts. It's the individual who chooses or causes that outcome. Situational attributions, on the other hand, explain events or people's actions due to external forces, the weather, random chance, accidents, social structures. All of these are situational attributions. And we'll see that we make some mistakes about behavior based on some consistent attributional errors. One of these is so important that it's called the fundamental attribution error. It happens very often, and it's very powerful, and it's also very likely to cause mistakes in our explanations of behavior. The fundamental attribution is our tendency to overemphasize individual personality traits and underestimate the effect of situational factors. Why did that person run the red light? They're a bad driver. As opposed to, well, maybe there's an emergency and they're on the way to the hospital. So we know more about behavior based on the information that we have about a person. We can see them do something. And we don't know all the situational factors that are affecting them, but we do know what they did. And so the simplest explanation is to explain it in terms of something personal about them. Related to this is the actor-observer bias. When we are interpreting our own behavior, we tend to focus on the situational factors. We know all the situations that are affecting us, or most of them. And so when we do something, we can explain it in terms of, this is what happened to me, and that's why I was in a bad mood today. That's why I ran the stop line. When we look at other people, we tend to commit that fundamental attribution error. We overemphasize their personal attributes. And so the actor-observer bias incorporates the fundamental attribution error. One way to think about this is when you are the actor, you can attribute the outcome to the situation. That is, you can see the situation. When you're the observer, what you see is the person, and so you tend to attribute the outcome to their personal traits. Stereotypes are explanations that attribute some characteristic to all members of a particular group. So a stereotype is an overgeneralization. For example, in the top figure here we see, it looks like to me, fans of the Montreal Canadiens hockey team. And so, we might make the stereotype that all Canadians like hockey. While hockey is very popular in Canada, it's probably the case that there are some Canadian citizens who don't enjoy the game. So when we have stereotypes, we tend to maintain them and think about people in terms of their membership in a particular group and ascribe characteristics to them that may or may not be true. Now, every now and then there's somebody who just doesn't fit the stereotype. And what people tend to do is, rather than get rid of the stereotype, they create a subtype. So this is sometimes called the no true Scotsman example, based on an example where all Scotsmen do X, and you've got this person who doesn't do it. Well, they're not a true Scotsman. So we tend to subtype people who don't fit the stereotype and are so obviously don't fit it that we're unable to explain it any other way. Stereotypes can also be so pervasive and so automatic that we're not even aware of them. These images are from a 2001 study by Payne. In this study, people were subliminally shown a picture of a face, either a white face or a black face. So this happened so fast that they were not consciously aware of it. So there's not a conscious influence here. This is all subconscious. They were then shown a picture of either a weapon or a tool, and they were asked to characterize it as quickly as they could as either weapon or tool. The people who had been, and these were all white subjects, the subjects who had been shown the black face were more rapidly able to correctly identify the gun and more often made the mistake of calling the tool a weapon. Now again, this is unconscious because they were not consciously aware of which face they saw. So stereotypes can be so powerful as to even operate unconsciously, which is one of the things that makes them particularly dangerous. We've probably heard the term self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, a self-fulfilling prophecy is when one behaves in ways that confirm their own expectations about other people's behavior. I'm sorry, that confirm their own expectations about their behavior. So, the classic example of this is the study by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. And what they did, they went into an elementary school classroom at the beginning of the year, and they gave all the students a test. And based on this test, they told the teachers for the class that some of these students were incipient bloomers, that they were going to do really well that year. Well, what happened was they had actually just picked these kids at random. There was no relationship to the test scores in any way, shape, or form. And yet, at the end of the school year, they found that the students who they'd identified as really about to take off, they were bloomers, had done much better than the other students. The explanation is the self-fulfilling prophecy. That is, the teachers, thinking that these were good students, or students who were really going to do well that year, gave them more attention. And particularly for elementary school students, when they get more attention, they tend to be more invested in their schoolwork and do better. So the prediction that the teacher believed actually influenced the teacher's behavior and caused the differences in the student's performance. Prejudice and discrimination are often used together, but the distinction is that prejudice is the attitude or feeling. It's this negative idea you have about a stereotype. All tall people are get sunburned. Discrimination is the behavior where you differentially treat people based on their group membership. Because tall people all get sunburned, I'm not going to allow them to be in my class because I don't really want to see peeling skin all over my head. That would be discrimination. Related to this is something called the in-group favoritism or the in-group outgroup bias. We all identify ourselves as belonging to one or more in-groups. That is, people like us. And depending on the situation, our in-group can change. It might be based on race, gender, where you live, where you go to school, what your family's ethnic background is, the kind of sports team you root for, anything. And we tend to identify ourselves with these in-groups. We also tend to play favorites. We give the benefit of the doubt to, we're nicer to, we take care of in-group members, and we tend to treat others, the people who are not in our in-group, that is, the out-group, less well. You see people giving benefits to people who are like them all the time. You know, you see this in employment discrimination. You see it at, a classic example would be the big basketball game that just happened around here. By the time you hear this lecture, there will be one more game that will be be finished. But when Carolina and Duke play, there's a real in-group, out-group dynamic, and each side casts aspersions on the other side, talks about how they're no good and dumb, and you name it, and our group is much better. I can't imagine how tough that must be on the actual players. Because we have had some changes in what's socially acceptable, prejudice and discrimination have become more subtle. There's a social sanction to being overtly prejudicial or discriminatory against various groups in society. And so it comes out in a more subtle fashion. And one term for this in terms of racial prejudice is modern racism, where people say, I'm not racist, I just don't like blank. It's a way to avoid the social sanctions that come with being overtly discriminatory while still maintaining those same attitudes. Social psychologists have often been interested in the effects of competition and cooperation. Most people are probably familiar with the Williams sisters, who both cooperated when they were playing doubles and competed against each other in singles play. There is a classic study about competition and cooperation conducted by a Sharif in 1961 at the Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. Basically, they took some middle school students, and the kids were all pretty homogeneous. They were all like similar backgrounds, similar schools, similar parents, similar socioeconomic status. And they took a group of them out to the park, and they had them, set up and play games and have a good time. And then about a week later, they brought out another group, but they didn't tell the first group about the second group at first. Finally, they had the two groups engage in competitions for prizes. And this quickly led to an in-group, out-group dynamic where each group tried to damage the other group's tent. There was a giant food fight in the cafeteria. They really did not like each other because they were competing for prizes. And so the researchers were therefore able to show that competition can lead people to do some pretty unsavory things because winning's the only thing. When the reward is only for winning, then people will do what they need to win. So they demonstrated how to get them to cooperate. And it turns out that if you have two groups that don't like each other work together in particular ways, you can overcome that in-group, out-group distinction. So they set up a couple of conditions where the boys had to work together. One of them, the supply truck supposedly broke down on the way to camp, and all of them had to work together to tow it into camp. Another one was the researchers disconnected the water pipe that brought water to the camp, and all the boys had to work together to get the pipe restored. So there are a couple of important characteristics of this cooperation that are necessary for groups to stop disliking each other. One is there must be a common objective. Another is you must need everybody's help. All members of both groups have to be necessary in order to complete the task. You can't do it without everybody. And third, everybody has to be of equal status. Just contacting each other, just hanging out together doesn't do it. They have to have a common objective that they need everybody's help to accomplish, and everybody has to be of equal status. In the 1970s, Elliot Aronson in Texas developed a model called the jigsaw classroom, in which students who were of different racial backgrounds or different sex had to work together in mixed race or mixed sex groups in order to learn the lesson. And basically what they do is they break the lesson into components, and let's say there's 6 parts to the lesson. There's a group of 6 people. There are groups of 6 people. And let's say that there are 4 groups of 6. All 4 people in the first position, that is, one person from each group, learns one part of the lesson. All 4 people from the 4 different groups, another at the second position, learn the second part of the lesson, and so forth. And then each group comes back together. And in order for the group to learn the whole lesson, they must all communicate and teach each other. And what he was able to demonstrate is that kids who had been excluded or the teachers thought weren't participating became much more engaged, and their scores went up when they were all working together towards a common goal, and you needed everybody, and you needed everybody equally. So one of the ways to improve cooperation is to get people to see that they are similar, that they are all after the same thing. There has to be a common goal, and it has to be something that everybody is needed for, and it has to be something where everybody's participation is equally valuable. Attitudes are the evaluations we have of things. Do we like this? Is this product something we would buy? Is this some event that we would like to go to? Or do we not like them? And you can kind of break these into 2 general classifications. Simple attitudes are when your behavior and your attitude are consistent. I like coffee, I drink the coffee. Complex attitudes are when your behavior is inconsistent with your attitude, which is much more complicated, and people sometimes have to go through some real mental gymnastics in order to justify their behavior. In general, the more important and relevant an attitude is, the more likely it is to be a simple attitude, that is, to predict your behavior. And part of this involves something called attitude accessibility. The easier it is to think about or to recall a particular attitude that you have, the more likely it is to be influential in affecting your behavior. If the attitude is largely unconscious, it's more likely to be a complex attitude in which your behavior may be inconsistent with that. There are several ways that attitudes develop. One of these is what's called mere exposure. Just seeing something or someone repeatedly makes them seem more familiar, and we like things that are familiar. This is the idea behind advertising campaigns for a new product. You often see lots and lots of advertisement for a new product. so that people will develop a positive attitude toward it. It's the idea behind the signs and mailings for political campaigns. You see the name, the more you see the name, more you like the name. The more you like the name, the more likely you are to vote for the person. A second way that attitudes are formed is through something called classical conditioning. If you remember about classical conditioning, you have a neutral stimulus that's paired with a conditioned stimulus, an unconditioned stimulus, and the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. So in this case, Brad Pitt here is the unconditioned stimulus. People generally have positive feelings about him. You pair this perfume, Chanel No. 5, with Brad Pitt. The perfume is a neutral stimulus, but through repeated presentation of the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, that is, the perfume with Brad Pitt, people tend to start having positive feelings toward the perfume. This technique comes from the work of John Watson, who we talked about in the chapter on learning. Socialization also drives our attitudes. So, for example, all societies have what are called agents of socialization. These are people whose designated role in society is to teach the morals and values of the society to each upcoming generation. And these might be parents, caregivers, teachers, religious leaders, politicians, etc., depending on the society. And so family of origin, in particular, has a large impact on the attitudes that you have. We tend to end up with the same attitudes that our parents had, much as we try to avoid it sometimes. Attitudes can also be broken into explicit and implicit attitudes. So, explicit attitudes are those that we're aware of, right? I have the attitude that I like coffee, so I know this, I'm aware of this, it guides my behavior, let me go get a cup of coffee. Implicit attitudes are those that we're not aware of, that can influence our behavior unconsciously. There's actually a measure called the implicit association test that measures our implicit attitudes towards people. So, in many cases, our behavior towards others is driven in a particular direction by beliefs or values that we have that are not even available to consciousness. And so on Thursday, I will start with the discussion of cognitive dissonance, and then we will finish up on chapter 12, and I'll see you then.